Text, disclosure.
In this next section, we're going to be discussing disclosure and how disclosure applies in the pre-employment transition services environment. This goes along with the CRCC Code of Ethics, Section C1.
Next slide. Who is the client?
So the first question that we often want to ask ourselves is, who is the client? And in pre-ed services, our clients are always the students or youth with a disability. If they are a minor or if they don't have capacity to consent, the legal guardian of the youth or student with a disability is a client as well. So what does this mean to the counselor? Well, disclosure, informed consent, decision-making, contracts and agreements must include more than just the minor in these situations. And this includes any kind of written documentation as well as verbal disclosure.
Informed consent.
When we talk about informed consent, we're talking about disclosure statements. And informed consent is something that every counselor should be providing, both written and verbally, to all clients that they are working with, whether it be in pre-ed services or not. Section A3A includes guidelines around disclosure statements. And in pre-ed services, oftentimes school districts will have disclosure statements for students with disabilities, but these don't often cover the full scope of CRC involvement in the pre-ed services, excuse me. So therefore, it's really important that you as the counselor must review these informed consent documents with the minor, with the student, and with their legal guardian. It may be that addendums or additional documents are needed so that full disclosure is provided. It may be that this is also done verbally and in written. You may revisit an informed consent document later on, and really it should be presented in a manner that's consistent with the minor's understanding. I always tell students that I'm working with as an instructor that how you present your disclosure statement and how you present informed consent is always going to depend on the client that you're working with. And so you may not use the terminology that we're using today. You may work with that individual to help them understand what it means. What does it mean by consent? What does that mean to the student? What does that mean to you? What does it mean to be confidential? And how they understand these types of documents. So it's important to speak with your clients at the level that they understand the best.
Values.
Personal and professional values are a really important part of disclosure statements and informed consent as well. We're looking at the CRCC Code of Ethics, Section D2. There's a difference between values-aware counseling and values-free counseling. In counseling, we're never asking ourselves to be free of all the values that we hold true to us and who make us who we are. We have to be aware of that, though. We have to be aware of our worldview. We have to be aware of our areas of competence, our areas where we need some work and can continue growing. And we always need to be asking ourselves, based on my professional values and my personal values and the work that I'm doing with my clients, whose needs are being met by disclosing information about myself? So this is, again, a different area of disclosure, professional disclosure. What information about myself does my client need to have in order for us to develop that very good therapeutic bond that we hope comes out of any kind of counseling relationship? Our personal values can narrow, but not broaden professional ethics. And so it's important just to kind of check them at the door, so to say, whenever we are working with client populations. Counselors don't often intentionally discriminate. It's not something that we're out there to do, where it would be against our ethical principles. And so it sometimes happens without us even being aware that we're doing it, or unintentionally. So it's important that we, again, are aware of what our personal values are, how we display those personal values, how we work those values into the discussions that we have with our peers and our colleagues, and make sure that we're not letting some of those personal values seep into the work that we're doing with our clients. Again, there needs to be a benefit anytime that we're disclosing anything about ourselves to our client population.
Practical application, counselors.
So the practical application for this, counselors they of course believe what you wish, that we are human beings. We should have our beliefs and our value systems that guide us in our personal lives and our professional lives to a degree, but we have to behave in accordance to the ethical standards. We have to monitor and challenge some of these beliefs and biases that we might hold. We are never bias free. We have to be able to understand where our biases lay and how we can manage those. We are always acting to do no harm to our clients, and we're using culturally and developmentally appropriate counseling strategies and tools and techniques for our clients. And at the root of it all, we're always advocating for our client, right? So we're always making sure that their needs are getting met. And in some cases in the school system, that can be a big task.
Competence.
Competence is another important area of ethics that we have to consider as counselors and our work in pre-ets. As we all know, the pre-ets work that we were doing as students might not have been as in-depth as it could have been, depending on when you graduated and if there was a great emphasis on pre-ed services whenever you went through your master's program. So it's an ongoing process of development to continue to work on ourselves and learn the skills that we need to learn to keep up with changes in our client populations, trends in counseling. Again, increasing self-awareness about the things that we need to know more about, how we can better provide a service to the students and adolescents that we're working with. Increasing skills. I tell myself and my students, we're never done learning in this profession. We can always grow and we can always do better. But it's a matter of being able to identify where those deficits are and then take those steps to increase our competence. And making sure that in times whenever we feel like we aren't as competent as we should be or could be, or we feel like we aren't the best counselor or potential counselor for a client or a group, that we are making those appropriate referrals, but we're basing those on the needs of the client, not based on our values and our beliefs, which can, in some cases, unfortunately, lead to discriminatory practices.
Practical application. Recognize limits and burnout.
In terms of the practical application for all areas of disclosure, making sure to recognize limits and the risk of practicing unethically, practicing within your scope of knowledge, and always working to expand your scope of knowledge, making sure that you're consulting with your colleagues, your peers, seeking supervision is such an important part of being able to self-regulate these biases, to be able to look inside of ourselves and say, what are the things that we need to work on? A lot of things can come out during supervision. And we talk about self-care all the time with our clients. Of course we do. And we should be talking about with ourselves more. And we might talk the talk, but not walk the walk when it comes to self-care. And we have to be able to recognize when we are becoming a little bit burnout, fatigued. Compassion fatigue is another term that we commonly use for burnout, because at some point it can lead to impairment. And when that occurs, unfortunately, that's when these ethical issues can seep into the work that we're doing.
Clients have the right to equal treatment in the provision of services, reasonable accommodation and accessible information. Engage in decisions, contact assistance programs,